Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison, and this is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. It is a confusing day to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. If you're a Purdue fan, you're probably not having the best day. If you're an IU fan, you're maybe feeling a little bit better. And if you're a Pacers fan, as most of us are, we're just having a great time knowing the Pacers are going to be back tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about today. I like days like this because we had one game yesterday, one big game at that yesterday with Purdue at Michigan State. We're going to talk about that first. And then what we're going to talk about second is what's happening tomorrow in the Pacers game against the Grizzlies. I like having a clear-cut one game happening yesterday, one game happening tomorrow, nothing happening on the day we're recording. Makes it easier. It's a fantastic day. Easy prep today. We're going to talk about the Purdue game first. Rare moment where we're opening the show with a college team. So not the Pacers or Colts. So we'll talk about Purdue first. They went to Michigan State. They lost. That's 3 in a row. After that, we're going to preview the Pacers-Grizzlies game. The Pacers come back, play Memphis, big-time game against the number 2 team in the West, at least according to the standings. That's going to be something worth speaking on. And then we're going to talk about IU basketball. Now, there's no game to preview. There's no game to recap. IU doesn't play for a 9-day stretch, in between the UCLA game last week on, I believe, Valentine's Day, and then this upcoming Sunday when they host Purdue for the second time. That's what we're going to talk about on Friday is the Purdue game. We'll talk about IU in a more general, broad sense and see whether or not we think that they really have a chance at the NCAA tournament. What is their at-large resume? What is their chances of maybe sneaking into the field with an at-large bid, maybe a first four type of team? When we get to that point in the show, we'll talk about IU. And then we're going to talk about the Colts. We had a segment about Aaron Rodgers last show on Monday. We talked about how he's leaving the Jets, where he could go. There's talk about him potentially coming to Indianapolis. We're going to talk about what that would mean, whether or not I want that, whether or not I think that's the worst thing that could happen to the franchise. Colts and Aaron Rodgers, if those two names pair up with one another this upcoming season, what is that going to mean? Is it going to be good or bad? That's what we'll talk about fourth. And then we're branching outside of Indiana. The college football playoff is going to expand again. We'll talk about that, what that means, whether or not I like that. And then we'll list off a few teams that I think are true title contenders in the NBA as we emerge from the All-Star break. Lots to talk about today. We're going to start with Purdue. Purdue went on the road to play Michigan State, which is my favorite arena in the Big Ten that's not Mackey Arena or Assembly Hall. I love Michigan State. I love aesthetically. I love watching games there. So I was circling this game for a while, and I got lucky because Purdue and IU both traveled to Michigan State. IU pulled out a win. Purdue did not. They lost 75-66. That means that the Purdue Boilermakers have lost 3 in a row to ranked conference opponents back to back to back. There's a grouping of 4, now kind of 5 teams, with Maryland being included, at the top of the Big Ten. They're all the only ranked teams in the Big Ten, those 5. But really, it felt like the teams that could win the league were Michigan, Purdue, Michigan State, with Wisconsin being on the outside looking in with some sort of an outside shot at it. That's what we were sort of looking at, was Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin. Purdue got all 3 of those teams. They played all 3 of those teams 3 games in a row and lost all of them. And that's how Purdue goes from being really effectively tied at the top of the Big Ten to out of the conversation to win the regular season title after losing to the 3 other teams at the top all in a row. Michigan State was the last one. They cap off this slide. At least we think they cap off this slide. For all we know, Purdue loses to Indiana on Sunday and makes it a 4-game losing streak. But this is the first time that Purdue has lost 3 times in a row this season. It is arguably the most difficult stretch of games of the season. They're now 11-5, 4th in the Big Ten. They probably don't have a chance at winning the regular season title. There maybe could be some chaos scenarios. We'll talk about that later in the segment. Right now, Purdue's focus really is just maintaining a top 4 seed and maintaining that double bye in the Big Ten tournament. Really, it's just a single bye, technically, but we call it a double bye because they'll skip the first 2 days of the Big Ten tournament. We want to see Purdue stay in that top 4 range. It's kind of baffling at this point in the year that that's the conversation we're having, that we need to sort of talk about the fact that Purdue needs to stay afloat at the top of the Big Ten rather than competing for a title. But regardless, Purdue lost to Michigan State, and there were 2 main issues in the loss in the game, right? Losing this game, there was really 2 things that stuck out to me for why that happened. And then I want to talk about the larger issues at hand because there's two major holes and two major flaws that Purdue sort of employs this year in men's basketball. It's the difference between past seasons and this current season. It's the difference between last season's team that went to the championship game and this season's team. In the game against Michigan State last night, the biggest issue, anyone who watched the game could probably say it was rim protection. Purdue doesn't have Zach Edey anymore, right? That's common sense. We know that. It's just Trey Coffin-Renn, and there's been a considerable defensive drop-off. Most of the focus around the conversation this offseason with the departure of Zach Edey to the NBA was on offense, how they're going to have to shift how they play, because forever the offense would just flow through the anchor and Zach Edey, and at the very least you understood that he's down there somewhere, right? As much as that's as a saying in football. Truly the idea that he was down there somewhere, and at least in mind, Zach Edey getting the basketball was one of the primary targets on every single possession. Now you kind of have to shift that because Trey Coffin-Renn doesn't have the ability physically to be as dominant as Zach Edey down low. TKR has been fantastic, no hate to him at all. But regardless, rim protection has been an issue on defense, and that's something that we maybe didn't fully anticipate heading into this year. Michigan State was lobbing up dunks left and right. I should have gone back and counted because it felt like every possession, if they were scoring in the paint, it was a lob and a dunk. And it got the crowd fired up, rightfully so. And every single time you see Trey Coffin-Renn looking up at the hoop, sort of disappointed and in awe, really, at what was happening to him. And this has been a method that top teams in the Big Ten have been using to attack Purdue and to beat Purdue, at least on their own offensive side of the basketball. One thing that Purdue is built on is not necessarily a two-big-man system, but certainly a two-big-man system in terms of the roster, right? Forever, and when I say forever, I mean basically my entire lifetime, there's been this idea that you transition from one big man to the other with at least 1, maybe 2 years of overlap. We went, and I might have the sequencing wrong here, but you'll recognize the names. We had Isaac Haas and Matt Haarms at the same time, right? And as Isaac Haas was phasing out to graduation, Matt Haarms was garnering some experience. He was not the primary big man, but he was one of them, right? And then Matt Haarms, when Isaac Haas leaves, he now steps up and he now has the starting experience and he has the understudy experience. He becomes the starting big man, effectively. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Travion Williams is the secondary guy. And then he phases out. Travion Williams becomes the number one man down low. Zach Edey phases in. And so, and then Zach Edey transitions into Trey Coffin-Renn. So, there's a seamless transition between big man for Purdue. And that's really, in my opinion, why I looked at the loss of Zach Edey and said, sure, that's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt that much. Purdue will still be an elite team in the Big Ten because Trey Coffin-Renn is just going to be that next plug-and-play guy. Maybe he doesn't go to the NBA. He's probably not National Player of the Year candidate like Zach Edey, but Trey Coffin-Renn certainly still had an opportunity to be spectacular, and he has been spectacular. But what happened in the very beginning of the season? Daniel Jacobson was out for the year. He got injured. That is tragic because he is that understudy. This means two things. One, for the long-term future of Purdue, they lost a year of that understudy existing, right? Or Jacobson, rather, not having him be that understudy decreases his amount of starting experience and experience in games. It also decreases his ability to kind of prepare himself to be the next Trey Coffin-Renn. Now, that's the long-term issue. In the short term this season, what that means is Trey Coffin-Renn doesn't have someone next to him. And Caleb Furst hasn't really been, and he's not really supposed to be the presence as a forward to be physically assertive and defend when it gets ugly down low in between the blocks. Trey Coffin-Renn's really the only player of his player type, of his skill set on this roster, which is fine until it's not. And Michigan plays two big men at the same time a lot. And teams were doing this. Michigan State was doing this. It started in the backcourt where you're attacking Trey Coffin-Renn. You put two big men on the floor, or you at least position your roster and position your style of offense in a way where you're targeting the blocks because you understand the fact that Trey Coffin-Renn is all alone down there, and you can lob it in there and dunk it over him because he's not Zach Edey. Athletically, he's not that physically imposing, perhaps. Across the board, he's not that imposing compared to Zach Edey. You can just lob it up and dunk it over Trey Coffin-Renn because he's all alone down there. And there's not enough physicality down low, and that's partially because we don't have that understudy and Daniel Jacobson to tower over everybody between the blocks. So I throw around the word understudy. I think that's what I'm going to call that underclassman big men that Purdue has had forever, right? And it transitions. It's a constant flow. Isaac Haas and Matt Haarms, they never have to have a situation where they're relying on a freshman big man because there's always somebody above them, right? In terms of age, in terms of experience, whatever. There's always somebody above them to teach, to guide, and at the very least to take the pressure off of them to make that underclassman not necessarily the guy up there or down there, perhaps in between the blocks. They don't have to be the number one player because there's someone older than it is, and that older player is ready because of their years as an understudy. It's this constant flow. It works out perfectly. Trey Coffin-Renn doesn't have that understudy in Daniel Jacobson. He's all alone. He's getting dominated down low by teams that understand the fact that he is at least one of the weaknesses of the defense. And I shouldn't say that he's a weakness of the defense, but at that area of the floor, I should say it this way. Trey Coffin-Renn's fantastic, but he's all alone. So that area of the floor in the front court is a weakness of the defense for Purdue because Trey Coffin-Renn is all alone. So when you see opposing teams like Michigan State now start to figure out that if we target him offensively, we're going to be great. Because Michigan State understands that they're not good from three. They're the worst shooting from the three-point line team in the Big Ten. Heard that on the broadcast. So if that's true, then you understand the fact that they're going to have to shoot well from beneath the arc. And Purdue is horrific at defending shots inside the arc because they don't have that physical presence in Zach Edey to rely on anymore. So they understand the fact that if they attack the blocks and if they attack Trey Coffin-Renn, they're going to find opportunities. They're going to find space. They're going to find open shots a decent amount of the time because, again, Trey Coffin-Renn effectively is all alone down there. That was one issue in this game, and that's a harbinger of an issue for the rest of the season is rim protection. And teams that understand how to get downhill, get to the cup, and get around Trey Coffin-Renn, they're going to be able to if they scheme it up correctly. And that really could be one of Purdue's pitfalls paired with the other issue, which is really, I feel like, a hole on offense, which is the fact that they don't have a second scorer in the backcourt. If their largest hole on defense is the void left by Edey and the fact that they don't have the rim protection to defend themselves at the end of the day, the largest hole on offense is the lack of a second scorer. This is just flat out unfortunate because Matt Painter and this recruiting staff, they did pretty much everything they could to set themselves up for success in this way by recruiting Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer at the same time, right? Braden Smith has emerged to be fantastic. He's one of the best point guards in the country, in my opinion. Fletcher Loyer has not emerged to be that level, and it's not like we needed two elite guards in order to be good. But certainly in order to win a national championship, you'd appreciate having two elite guards or at least two guards on the doorstep of elite. To me, Fletcher Loyer in this game was an example of someone that should have been doing more. There was only two double-digit scores in this game for Purdue. As you can imagine, it was Trey Coffin-Renn and Braden Smith. Michigan State had 4 players scoring in double digits, and they had 2 others with 9. So effectively, almost 6 players that were shooting or scoring in the double digits. That is a strength of Michigan State. They spread the ball around very well. They're one of the best assisting teams in the country. And independent from that, they have a lot of guys that can shoot and a lot of guys that can score, and they spread the ball around to those guys effectively. And that's part of the reason why Michigan State is good is so good is just because of how deep they are and how expansive their scoring opportunities perhaps can be across their roster and into their bench. Purdue, on the other hand, only had TKR and Braden Smith in this situation. We were supposed to see Fletcher Loyer emerge as the second part of this tandem with Braden Smith. He was supposed to be legendary, right? Braden Smith is fantastic. Fletcher Loyer has been underwhelming. He had 8 points in this game. He was shooting 40% from the field. He was 2 for 3 from the three-point line, but still, 8 points on 40% shooting from the field, 2 for 5. He's not taking enough shots as what's supposed to be our number 2 guard in Fletcher Loyer, an experienced guard. He's only scoring 8 points in this game, but again, he took 5 shots from the field, right? That's not what we want to see from Fletcher Loyer. He's supposed to be more than that. That's something we want to see from someone like CJ Cox or Miles Colvin or Jakari Harris even. Somebody that maybe can put themselves in a position to stand in the corner, put up a couple pop-up threes, right? Find a few shots here and there, come out of the game, come back in to be some fresh legs and add a new method of intrigue, I suppose, to the game from a roster composition standpoint. But Loyer hasn't been a premier shooter that can hit the clutch shot when necessary, and he's not even really someone to be relied on in terms of scoring productively, efficiently, consistently, like Braden Smith has been. I don't necessarily want Fletcher Loyer to be Braden Smith, but it'd be nice if he was at least close from a production standpoint. He hasn't been. And that is another pitfall of this Purdue team. And it's not necessarily Fletcher Loyer's, well, it probably is Fletcher Loyer's fault, but it's not necessarily to the fault of Purdue, because they put themselves in position to have a roster that could have a big man anchor, have 2 or 3 elite guards, and really just play through those strengths. Fletcher Loyer hasn't been that second premier guard. So if Braden Smith is having a bad game like we saw against Wisconsin, Purdue doesn't have anything going for him. It was fortunate that Trakoff and Wren went for 32, but their backcourt is completely lackluster if Braden Smith is not playing well. And even if he is, eventually defenses are going to sort of cater to that, and eventually defenses are going to start to pander to that. They're going to shift their attention towards Braden Smith, and the next thing you know, Braden Smith has to kick it out to the corner. Who's going to hit that three? Nobody. It hasn't been Fletcher Loyer, and most of these guards are too young to really expect them to hit those shots consistently. We really learned that lesson when Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer were underclassmen. In their freshman and sophomore years in those tournaments, Purdue struggled, and it's partially because their backcourt was super inexperienced, which is totally understandable. But Fletcher Loyer's experienced now, right? This is a Fletcher Loyer that's an upperclassman and ready to potentially have a high level of success at this point in his career, and he honestly hasn't, certainly not even close to the same way Braden Smith has. So those two issues for me are what I think are the larger holes. One on defense is rim protection with the loss of Zach Edey, Trakoff, and Wren. The fact that he's all alone is a weakness, and teams are attacking that, and they're scoring in that way. And then on offense, Purdue in some cases can't keep up because Fletcher Loyer, for example, or really just that entire backcourt supporting cast, there isn't someone that can score. There isn't someone that can hit those shots when Braden Smith can't, or when Braden Smith needs an extra guy, right? If you're playing someone like Wisconsin who averages over 80 points a game, there's not someone else to hit those shots. Those are the two holes with Purdue right now on a larger scale. Now, in this game, rim protection was the biggest issue. I also thought the turnover battle was a bit concerning. Purdue turned the ball over 12 times. Michigan State only turned the ball over 6. Usually, Michigan State turns the ball over a lot, right? They average 11.3, so that should have been even. I think that the turnover margin is a little bit different than this game probably turns out entirely different. It was a 9-point loss for Purdue. Fletcher Loyer's last shot was in garbage time, effectively a buzzer beater at the end. So really in the final 5 seconds, this was a 12-point loss for Purdue, which is concerning. By the way, at the end of the day, I'm being way too hard on this team because this is on the road against a top 15 conference opponent in Michigan State who probably despises you, finally has a team that could potentially win a title under Tom Izzo. I don't really think so, but they're at that level. Second weekend caliber team in Michigan State. And Purdue comes into your building. It's a difficult task, and Purdue's coming off a 2-game losing streak. This game in a vacuum is very understandable. This loss in a vacuum is very understandable. If you just look at the schedule and say, okay, I'm going to spoil one game for you, Purdue's going to lose by 9 on the road against Michigan State. They're going to be ranked number 14. That kind of makes sense. You look at that and you think it's okay. The reason why it's so alarming is because this is the third in a row, right? And again, all these losses are still understandable. At Michigan, understandable for the same reasons, especially because it was only by 2. The Wisconsin loss, even though it was at home, is understandable. These 3 losses in a row is uncharacteristic of Purdue in the last few years. It really shows the difference between this year's Purdue team and last year's Purdue team that really was contending for a title. And this string of losses is really showing me why Purdue is not a championship caliber team, perhaps. I shouldn't have said tournament. A championship caliber team. I don't think Purdue will win a title. I don't think they can. And I think it's partially because, again, rim protection on defense and the lack of a second premier reliable scorer on offense in the backcourt. Fletcher Loyer has to improve, or somebody else has to massively exceed expectations and step up to be that guy. Or else Braden Smith and Trakoff and Wren could have we could have more games like this one against Michigan State, where the offense is entirely fueled by Smith and Kaufman-Wren, and defensively Kaufman-Wren is getting bullied down low, and there's just not much Purdue can do to catch up. They kept up for the majority of this game. They put themselves in position late, but Michigan State controlled this game for effectively the entire time, and that made it very difficult for Purdue on the road to come back when they don't have much offense outside of their 2-star players, and their defense is continuously unstable. Moving forward, what worries me is that Purdue could lose to Indiana on Sunday, because that game's at Assembly Hall. Indiana's going to be on 9 days of rest. It's going to be their Super Bowl in Assembly Hall. We're going to preview that game on Friday, which it works out that game's on Sunday because there's more time in between the preview and the actual game. So we'll talk more about that game, of course. It's one of the biggest games on the schedule in college basketball for this show. Purdue at IU on Sunday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. We will preview that game, as I said, on Friday. But what worries me is that Purdue might be in position to lose a fourth straight because Indiana's been close. They were close last time. They've been close against some good teams. They went to Michigan State and won, which is fantastic for them. Indiana, a bubble team, looking to pick up another quad one opportunity. It could be a trap spot for Purdue, and that would be a fourth loss in a row, which would be killer for their seeding. It would be killer for their Big Ten standing across the board as we head into the tournament. That game's going to be difficult. After that, they play, again, a string of tournament teams for the most part. They have UCLA and Rutgers inside Mackey Arena. Rutgers won't make the tournament. UCLA probably will. They go to Illinois to close out the regular season, and then we have the Big Ten tournament. Right now, Purdue is the 4 seed, which would mean that they would play one team out of Maryland, Indiana, and Minnesota. Maryland's the 5 at the moment. That's obviously the most likely candidate. Could be Indiana, could be Minnesota. That's who Purdue would be playing in their first game in, what would that be, the quarterfinals, I believe, of the Big Ten tournament? I think that's correct. And, of course, a win would put them against the number 1 team, which at the moment is still Michigan. So Purdue's in the mix. They could still win the conference tournament. They probably can't win the regular season title. They very well could lose in the first game of the Big Ten conference tournament. But regardless, Purdue moving forward has a few opportunities to really ramp up some momentum, right? They just had their toughest stretch of the conference schedule. Their honestly toughest stretch of the schedule as a whole entirely with Michigan, Wisconsin, at Michigan State. Lost all 3. Now it's time to regroup. Got a few days of rest before IU. Season sweep IU and then ramp up against some lower level tournament teams in UCLA and Illinois, and I suppose the Rutgers game counts too. Before you get to the Big Ten tournament, use the Big Ten tournament again to ramp yourselves up in terms of momentum into the NCAA tournament, and then we'll see how far this Purdue team can go once they're there. But this loss to Michigan State proves to me that Purdue's probably not a championship caliber team. Unfortunately, I hate to say that. I love Purdue, lifelong Purdue fan. I guess I'm wearing an IU sweater, but lifelong Purdue fan. I love Purdue. Been wanting to see them win a national championship for my entire life. They never have. Got very close last year, but again, couldn't make it happen. This loss to Michigan State really is not very encouraging to me. It really makes me feel like Purdue can't win a championship. I look forward to being proven wrong, but now it's time to reset ahead of the IU game. But rim protection and lack of a premier second scorer are the 2 issues and the 2 holes and flaws in this Purdue team. And that concerns me moving forward, and certainly was a concern in the game against Michigan State last night. Okay, let's talk about the Pacers. Continuing with basketball, we're going to talk about the NBA. The Pacers play the Grizzlies tomorrow. The NBA is back tonight. The Lakers play the Hornets randomly today, and then I think there's 18 teams, 9 games that play tomorrow. So the majority of the NBA is working its way back in. This weekend is, of course, the first weekend back after the All-Star break. Every team has had rest. Teams have had opportunities to get healthy. This is an opportunity for the Pacers to take on the Grizzlies at home to kick off a string of games against Western Conference playoff teams, I suppose. They play the Grizzlies at home on Thursday. At home on Sunday, they play the Clippers, and then the Nuggets on Monday. Those 2 games might be flipped around, so we'll preview them on Friday. Big weekend for the Pacers. But we're going to start with the Grizzlies game. Pacers have an opportunity to reset. They kind of, and I talked about this the last show, last segment about the Pacers, where they've kind of been screwed by the schedule. I hate to use that as an excuse, but it's true that the Pacers went to Paris and then came back for a couple home games, then went out to the West Coast for 4 games, came back. First home game was the Knicks, and then turned right back around and went out to Washington to play the Wizards. So the Pacers have done a lot of travel, right? They've done a lot of dotting around the country, playing some very high-quality opponents. As a result, their record has kind of slid back. I believe they're 6-4 in their last 10 games. Last game before the All-Star break was an overtime win over the Wizards on the road, which was difficult and taxing, but they made it happen. And now they have the Grizzlies. So we get a break, and now it's 3 Western Conference surefire playoff teams back to back to back. I'm interested to see if the Pacers can pick up a win here against the Grizzlies. It's going to be difficult. They're looking to stay in control of the 4 seed. The Grizzlies are 36-18. They're number 2 in the West. They're 8 games back from OKC and half a game above Denver. Memphis is 15-12 on the road. They're 7-3 in their last 10 games. Their last 10 games before the All-Star break. Their best player is Jaren Jackson Jr., statistically. He has 23 points per game. John Morant and Desmond Bane round out the big 3. So really, and the Grizzlies have a great supporting cast, but really they have a big three group of stars. It's Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, Desmond Bane. If they're all playing and all playing well, Memphis can beat anybody. And that is sort of evidenced by the fact that they're the best offense in the league. They score the most points. They score 123 points per game, number one in the league in basically every scoring category. They're first, second, fourth, something like that, but first in points per game. This is the best offense statistically in the NBA. And that's also evidenced by last time the Grizzlies played the Pacers, they won 136-121 at home in Memphis. That was on December 1st. It was a part of a 4-game losing streak for the Pacers. And again, this was the time when the Pacers were bad. And this is the time when the Pacers were injured. They were up 19 against the Grizzlies on the road. It was fantastic. And then Jaren Jackson Jr.'s 25 points led the way in turning things around. But regardless, the Grizzlies score, and they score a lot. 136-121 was the victory in December when the Grizzlies took on the Pacers. And the way the Grizzlies are built statistically, they're really built to succeed on the offensive end of the floor. They're number 2 in points in the paint. They're number 4 in rebounds. Their front court is very strong. They shoot a very high volume of shots. They take a very high volume of shots. They're one of the best at offensive rebounding, but not very good at defensive rebounding. That's a very important point that we're going to touch on in a second. And on top of that, they turn the ball over quite a bit in transition. So Memphis shoots the ball at a high volume, and they score the majority of the time. They're a very great team shooting the basketball. They shoot at a high volume. If they make it, they make it. If they miss, then they're also one of the best rebounding teams in the league. They rebound very effectively on offense, and most likely they're going to run it up on the Pacers once again. Evidence, again, of how great the Memphis Grizzlies are on offense is that the last 3 times the Grizzlies have lost, I mentioned the fact that they were 7-3 in their last 10 games. All 3 of those losses, this is the amount of points that the opposing winning team scored: 128, 125, and the Knicks put up 143. So it's basically factual that in the last 10, it is factual that in the last 10 games, the only teams to knock off the Memphis Grizzlies, the number 2 team in the Western Conference, they've needed 125 points or more, which is a bit concerning because that's asking a lot of any team, and it's especially asking a lot of the Pacers right after the All-Star break. Again, 125 points. That's the minimum amount of points that a team has needed to beat the Grizzlies if they were to win against the Grizzlies in the past 10 games. Those teams were all playoff teams. I believe it was the Knicks, the Lakers, and I believe OKC as well was the other one. So all playoff teams, 2 of them in the West, 1 in the East, all teams that are potentially title contenders. They're actually all on my list of title contenders in a second. So if the Pacers are going to beat the Grizzlies, even though they're in Gainbridge, they're probably going to need over 125 points. Definitely going to need over 100, probably going to need over 120, 115, somewhere around that range. That's where the Pacers are going to need to be. So if Memphis is going to score, and they are going to score, because, again, it's going to be very difficult. They take shots at a high volume, and they take shots quickly into their possessions. It's going to be difficult to thwart their possessions right away. In transition is really the big indicator, the big area of the floor that's going to be the most of a swing for the Pacers, is if they can turn the ball over in transition, which is something that the Grizzlies do struggle with. That's the area of the floor the Pacers need to excel in defensively. Because if you let them get down the floor, they're shooting and they're scoring. And if they're not, they're rebounding and they're probably scoring on their second chance opportunity. So in transition, defensively, that's where the Pacers are going to have to turn the ball over. That's where the Pacers are going to have to make stops, especially down the stretch in this game. If they don't do that, Memphis is going to score. And as a result, Indiana is going to have to score in response. They're going to have to beat Memphis at their own game. Remember my point from before. Memphis isn't very good. I think they're 24th in the league in defensive rebounding. So when Indiana has the basketball, they've got to shoot, they've got to score, and they have to rebound. And they should be able to, because this is a team that's now basically fully healthy. We'll see if Miles Turner comes back. I think he will. We'll also see if John Morant plays on the other side. But Memphis knows how to win without John Morant. They've been without John Morant plenty this season and in seasons past. So for Indiana, right? Defensively, it's in transition, forcing turnovers. That's how they're going to make stops. Most likely, Memphis is going to just score anyway. If that is the case, then Indiana has to score in response. And probably regardless, Indiana is going to have to score at a high volume in response. Again, opposing teams that have beaten the Grizzlies have needed 125 points or more in the last 3 times that the Grizzlies have lost. So the Pacers, they're going to have to play the Memphis' way. They're going to have to rebound the basketball offensively. They're going to have to score. They're going to have to shoot well. They're going to have to hit a lot of threes. They're going to have to be gutsy enough to take those tough shots in those situations. Our big three has to knock off their big three, right? Our big three just has to be better, especially if Ja plays. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is a killer big three and one that's honestly capable of winning an NBA title. So the Pacers have to have a three to combat that. Now, what's interesting about the Pacers is they don't have a clear big three. That's what I kind of like about the Pacers. It's the fact that their success is focused on their supporting cast more than perhaps their stars. Tyrese Halliburton, if there is a big three, Tyrese Halliburton is in it. Pascal Siakam is in it. The question is, in this game, in a vacuum, in this game, zoom in on these 48 minutes, right? Who is going to be that third guy? Halliburton has to be playing well. Siakam has to be playing well down low. Someone has to be the third guy. We saw Mathurin take over against Washington. If Miles Turner plays, we've seen him take over in the past. We've seen Andrew Nembhard take over in the past. It's probably one of them three. Turner might not be fully 100% coming back from injury. Somebody has to be the third guy that's going to score at a high rate and be the third efficient offensive producer. Halliburton and Siakam have to be the first two, most likely. Is it Mathurin? Is it Nembhard? Could it be Turner? Who is going to fill in that role as that third scorer for the Pacers who's going to be able to allow Indiana to keep up with the Grizzlies in Gainbridge Fieldhouse? That's the question I am asking. Do the Pacers have a big three capable of matching the big three of the Grizzlies, if necessary, if Ja Morant plays? Indiana has to score. They have to rebound well offensively. They have to they may not have to, but they probably are going to have to get some stops in transition, force some turnovers in transition defensively. That's the key on defense. The key on offense is simply scoring, and it's individual play at that point. It's 3-on-3. Is Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, and Desmond Bane better than Halliburton, Siakam, and Mathurin or Nembhard or whoever's going to fill that role for the Pacers, that third guy? Do the Pacers have a third scorer in this game? That's going to be the interesting question. At home, they'll have the crowd at their backs. They have a great opportunity to even up the season series with the Grizzlies in this game. Is there a third scorer on this night, tomorrow night, against the Grizzlies? We will have to see. Again, the Grizzlies, phenomenal front court. Why? Zach Edey, to be honest. We just talked about him in the segment about Purdue, but Zach Edey's a major influence down there. So defensively, for the Pacers, force possessions to go your way in transition, in between the three-point lines, right? Because that's where you're going to force turnovers. If you let them get down the floor, they're probably scoring statistically. And on offense, you just have to have a third scorer. Those are the two keys to me for the Pacers. I repeated myself a little bit there, but I think you get the point. We need one more premier scorer, and we need to make stops in transition defensively. I would put emphasis on that key to the game on offense because that's, of course, the emphasis of the Grizzlies. 128, 125, 143. Those are the three numbers of points that winning teams against the Grizzlies have had in their last 10 games. This could be a statement win, and there's a tiny little break between now and the next two games. Unfortunately, those two are at home. It's a stretch where the Pacers can pick up some big-time quality wins. They'll need it because, again, this team is a game ahead of Milwaukee, about a game above Milwaukee for the 4 seed. They're about 2 games ahead of Detroit. Pacers are still technically trying to catch up to New York for the 3 seed. I don't think that's going to happen. But trying to keep the 4 seed, trying to keep Game 7 in the first round at home is the goal for Indiana. I think and I imagine that they will be capable of doing that. It's going to start right now at the beginning of the All-Star, the post-All-Star break session of the season against the Memphis Grizzlies. Elsewhere in the league, tomorrow night, the New York Knicks play Chicago in Madison Square Garden. Should be an easy win for them. And Milwaukee hosts the Clippers, maybe a spot where the Pacers can extend their lead if the Clippers pick up a win during their East Coast swing. That's all I have to say about that. This Grizzlies game is a big one on Thursday, potentially overshadowed by the All-Star game. Potentially people are just working their way back in. Hockey's on that night. That's going to be a big deal. USA versus Canada. We'll talk about that later. But either way, right? The Pacers are in a spot where they can pick up a major tone-setting win for the rest of the season against the Grizzlies. They're going to need to make stops in transition, and they're going to need to have a third score alongside Halliburton and Siakam in order to keep up with the Grizzlies most likely. It's a very interesting game. It's a telling game. It's a game that can really show if the Pacers would be capable of winning in the NBA Finals, because the Grizzlies are a team that could be in the NBA Finals, and the Pacers are a team that, if they were to get there, would have to face the Grizzlies in a 7-game series. If you can win this one at home, it would be a great sign for the Pacers' longevity in the playoffs, but most importantly, set the tone for the rest of the season in a way that, of course, we would desire. Pacers-Grizzlies on Thursday. Big-time game we'll talk about on Friday. I'm very excited to watch it all play out. Okay, let's talk about IU basketball. No game yesterday, no game tomorrow, no game in the general area of the week. We'll preview IU Purdue on Sunday. That game is on Sunday. We'll preview it on Friday. We're going to talk about IU regardless, though, and the question of whether or not they have a viable path to the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. Of course, they have a chance to make the tournament because they are still playing, and they will more than likely qualify for the Big Ten tournament. And once there, win the Big Ten tournament, qualify for the NCAA tournament, just like that. But let's talk about whether or not they have an at-large resume. I believe they do, and I am intrigued by that because when you look at Indiana, you don't really think tournament team, at least in terms of the NCAA tournament. There's a sizable gap on the schedule right now. They haven't played recently, so that gives Jerry Palm and Joe Lunardi plenty of time to update the bracketology according to their resume. Jerry Palm has them in the first 4 out, actually the second team out behind Georgia. And the next 4 out is where Joe Lunardi has them. He's a little bit less thrilled by the Hoosiers. They're 15-11, 6-9 in the Big Ten. They're 57th in the net. Now, when you see 57, you think, oh, that's above 68. Indiana's a tournament team. Not quite, because obviously the net isn't a one-to-one translation to the way the committee would act in I suppose the committee room when they're on Selection Sunday when they're determining who's going to the tournament. But also, bid thieves exist. So you look at that 57, but you also have to understand that the 68 best teams in the country don't make the NCAA tournament. There's there'll be 6 16 seeds, there'll be 4 15 seeds, there'll be, plenty of teams that win their conference tournaments that are barely worthy of being in the tournament, or definitely wouldn't be if they had not won their conference tournament. Plenty of bid thieves. So that 57, and as you start adding in the 16 seeds, you start adding in the champion of the Colonial Athletic Association, whatever, that 57 kicks down to 58 to 59 and eventually out of 68. And that's why Indiana's not in the field right now. Those bid thieves, 57th in the net. They're 2-11 in quad 1, 3-0 in quad 2, 6-0 in quad 3, 4-0 in quad 4. You hear that and you think that's great, and it honestly kind of is, because most teams in the country have at least one loss in quadrant 2. Indiana triumphantly beats everybody that is below them in the net, right? At home, on the road, if it qualifies as a game lower pedigree than quad 1, they win 100% of the time. That has to continue, but that's a good sign, and that's part of the reason why Indiana is so close is because they don't have any bad losses to bad teams, right? They have bad losses in terms of margin of victory, but they don't have bad losses in terms of the net, in terms of the team just being lower quality. They're 2-11 in quadrant 1. That's the slight concern, is that Indiana very much struggles to beat teams at their level or better than themselves, which indicates that once you get to the actual NCAA tournament, Indiana's going to be in a situation where they can't win a game. Maybe they're in the first 4, they win, and then they'll get blown away by the 6th seed, whoever it is, because they can't beat anyone above them. But they've shown that they can, and that's kind of why Indiana is where they are, and in position to play their way into the NCAA tournament as an at-large, because they beat everyone below them. They don't have any bad losses to bad teams, and they beat Michigan State. They beat Ohio State. Those are tournament caliber teams that they have wins against that they could potentially replicate in the tournament to indicate that they would deserve to be there by beating teams better than them. So 2-11 in quad 1, not good, but they have 3 quad 1 opportunities remaining. They have 1 quad 3 and 1 quad 2 game left to play as well. So the question is, what has to happen for Indiana to qualify for the NCAA tournament as an at-large team? Obviously, that depends quite heavily on what the rest of the bubble does. What do the teams around them do, right? Does Georgia succeed? Does Wake Forest succeed? Does North Carolina succeed? VCU? Are those teams going to continue winning? Are they going to lose? How is that going to impact Indiana? Are there going to be more bid thieves than usual? Is the 14th best team in the ACC going to win the tournament and steal the bid in the NCAA tournament? Is 2 teams from the American Athletic Conference somehow going to get in? Whatever it is, right? Whatever the conversation is, Indiana, their position and their opportunity to go to the NCAA tournament is very much dictated by what happens around them. But here's what they have left. They have Purdue, which is a quad 1 game. Penn State at home is quad 3. At Washington is quad 2. At Oregon is quad 1. And Ohio State at home is quad 1 as well. And then they have the Big Ten tournament. At the moment, the 12 seed, they would play Minnesota. And a win, I believe, would indicate that they would play against Maryland and then Purdue. Those would be their 3 opportunities then. So 3 quad 1 opportunities remaining, one of them on Sunday against Purdue. Potentially they could play Purdue again in the NCAA tournament, or excuse me, in the Big Ten tournament if they continue to win and if the standings shake out the way that they are right now. Obviously, things depend on what happens around them in the bubble. But as long as IU wins their easy games against Penn State and Washington, that's expected because they've never lost, again, a quad 2, quad 3, or quad 4 game. The one that concerns me is Washington just because it's so far on the road. Indiana hasn't done that and succeeded so far this season. That's one concern for IU at the moment. If they win both of those games, then if they win one quadrant 1 regular season opportunity, which again is a tall order, but they play Ohio State at home. They beat them on the road earlier in the year. Oregon is slipping and struggling. They play them on the road. Purdue, obviously, rivalry game, again, in Assembly Hall. It's not unthinkable to suggest that IU could rip off a quick quadrant 1 win. I think they need a quadrant 1 win again this season in order to, in the regular season, to make the NCAA tournament. Granted, if they go to the Big Ten tournament championship, they're probably in anyway. But as far as the regular season goes, you want to see IU pick up another quad 1 win, either against Purdue, Oregon, or Ohio State. Of course, that Oregon game's on the road. So if they win one, then they can win 2 to 3 Big Ten tournament games and be in, right? So let's just say, for example, IU can lose to Purdue. They can win their 2 easy games. They can go to Oregon and lose, but they beat Ohio State. Then as long as they take care of business, as the way the Big Ten tournament currently sits, as long as they take care of business against Minnesota and Maryland, and then upset Maryland, they're probably in. Maybe they would need another win against Purdue to make the semifinals. But if they win one quadrant 1 game, so that they go 3-2 the rest of the way and they beat and lose to the right teams, I think they can just make the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament and be totally fine. Maybe the quarterfinals. If they win 2 quadrant 1 games, they may not even need to make the quarterfinals, right? They could just beat Minnesota in the play-in round, I suppose, or the first day, and then lose on the second day and be fine. So to me, IU, the formula is, as long as we assume that they're going to beat Penn State and Washington, which is logically pretty sound because, again, 3-0, 6-0, 4-0 in quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4, as long as they win those games, then you only need one. You only need to make the semifinals or the quarterfinals of the Big Ten tournament if you win one quadrant 1 game the rest of the way. If they manage to win 2, then it's even less than that. The fact that they have 3 quadrant 1 opportunities left is very beneficial. Georgia plays in the SEC; it's very difficult. But some of the other teams around them in the bubble, Wake Forest and North Carolina, SMU, they don't have nearly as many quadrant 1 opportunities left on their schedule because the ACC just isn't that good. And once you get to the conference tournament season, again, the ACC simply isn't that good, and SMU, North Carolina, and Wake Forest are not quite going to have the same opportunities to win. Arkansas might lose right away. Georgia might lose right away. 2 other teams in the bubble just because the SEC tournament is going to be so difficult. But the environment around them is going to be difficult to manage. Bid thieves exist. It's going to be difficult to see how that goes. There's 3 ACC teams above them, like I said. That's Wake Forest, SMU, and North Carolina, according to Joe Lunardi. They're all in the area of IU. There's 3 ACC teams, which means they have a high chance of playing one another, at least in the rest of the regular season, or in the tournament. They'll probably be in a similar area. Maybe that's an 8-9 game somewhere. They'll be in a similar area of the bracket, most likely, is my point. So in the ACC, those teams could take each other out. The SEC could take each other out. VCU could just lose and then fall out entirely. Obviously, as long as Indiana keeps winning, they'll keep their position and only rise because bubble teams tend to lose just because they're bubble teams and they're frequently at this point in the year playing teams better than them. To me, IU, again, to reiterate, if they beat Penn State and Washington, they could either win one quadrant 1 game the rest of the regular season and then have to qualify for the semifinals, maybe the quarterfinals if they're lucky of the Big Ten tournament, or they could be in a situation where they win 2 quadrant 1 games. Maybe they win both the games inside Assembly Hall. Maybe they go to Oregon and pull off a win. And then they only need to win 1 or 2 tournament games and qualify for the quarterfinals or potentially just the second day of the tournament. That's what I would want to see if I were an IU fan. I suppose I kind of am wearing the sweater right now. I think that this is a situation where, again, it's manageable, it's doable. The game against Oregon is going to be absolutely massive. The game against Ohio State, again, absolutely massive. This Purdue game, gigantic. That would be their best win of the year if they manage to knock off Purdue. Especially inside Assembly Hall. Maybe the game on the road against Michigan State is technically better, but still, IU against Purdue, massive game. The rest of this season It's going to be difficult, but it is manageable and it is doable and it is workable. And we could be in a situation where after Coach Woodson steps down as the world screams that he should be fired, maybe his team ends up going to the NCAA tournament. That would be a very interesting situation to watch play out. The next step is beating Purdue at home, securing a quadrant 1 victory down the stretch. They only have 3 wins against future tournament teams, Michigan State, Ohio State, and I counted USC in that category. Are the only other teams that are potentially quad 1, quad 2 tournament wins. Purdue would be a team that is potentially projected to go to the Sweet 16. They could pick up a win against them this Sunday. We'll preview that game on Friday. It'll be huge, but IU does have a path to the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid. That's what I'm looking forward to see from IU, and it all starts this Sunday against the Boilermakers. Okay, let's talk about the Colts. Getting away from basketball for the first time for a little bit. We'll return on the show to the basketball conversation. But the Colts. What if Aaron Rodgers went to the Colts? This is a really interesting and important question to ask. Aaron Rodgers has been dismissed by the New York Jets, effectively. I think that's a good word to use for that situation. Aaron Rodgers is going to exit New York. He said that he wants to continue playing. So people were obviously talking about whether or not he was going to retire. He said he wants to keep going. Indy has been discussed as a potential candidate with their talented roster, right? They're on the doorstep of being a playoff team with their roster, and their uncertain future at quarterback is also in play there. Maybe the Colts are a quarterback away from going on a playoff run. I have no idea. We'll see how good Anthony Richardson is. We'll see how good the team is, the roster is, how well we draft. This team might be a draft, an offseason, and a quarterback away from making a deep playoff run. I'd love to see them turn it around in one offseason. Aaron Rodgers is being discussed as potentially the person that could lead the Colts in that charge to a playoff run. He's a veteran quarterback. He's very talented. Last season, top 10 in pass yards, top 10 in touchdown passes, 63% completion percentage. I point that out because Anthony Richardson has been under 50% for the majority of the year. Last year, Aaron Rodgers, one of the best, maybe the best passer of the football ever. He will deliver the ball to skill position players. He'll get the ball to your receivers, right? He'll hand the ball off well. He'll do everything he needs to do. He has a deep ball threat. He's more than a game manager. Everyone kind of knows Aaron Rodgers and his style of play, but he's a great passer of the football, and that's something that we don't really have right now. Because again, Anthony Richardson, if he throws the football, there's less than a 50% chance that it's going to be completed. So Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be a great passer of the football, and maybe if the Colts retool the secondary, maybe if they pick up Tyler Warren in the draft, get a steal with him, or even if they get Aaron Rodgers, they may not even need that. If they retool the secondary a little bit, probably not make a move for Myles Garrett if they make a move for Aaron Rodgers. But regardless, this is a guy that has still got it, right? And the question is just whether or not he has another Super Bowl in him. He will manage the game perfectly, right? He will deliver the ball to skill position players. He will play quarterback at a very high level, and that's really why this potential idea for a move would be attractive. I don't know if he would come here. You also have the Pat McAfee aspect of this, where Aaron Rodgers goes on the Pat McAfee show once a week, however often it is. Pat McAfee obviously does a show from Indy. He does the show. He obviously Colts legend, right? A guy that loves the Colts, wants to see the Colts do the best they can. This would be a great merging of worlds for him, I imagine. A great PR moment. And that is what I think is most prominent, is the fact that if this happens and it goes well, the PR is going to be fantastic. And Colts fans will be absolutely thrilled. Because Pat McAfee, he goes on Pat McAfee every week anyway, and now he'll be here. And if the Colts are winning and they're talking about that on Pat McAfee, would be incredible. The flip side of that is how awkward it would be if Aaron Rodgers comes to the Colts and performs poorly, or the Colts keep losing. Then all of a sudden that dynamic gets a little bit shifty. He might say a couple things that you don't want to hear if you're a Colts fan from him when a team is losing. And then things start to get toxic, and then things start to get complicated, and then things start to get chaotic. And that is what I'm afraid of. And that's where I kind of bring us to the cons section. If the pros are the fact that he's a veteran QB with maybe a lot to teach AR, very talented, would be a fantastic talent for this team. The cons are the complicated social presence. Because if things start going poorly, if he's unhappy or if the team is losing, that's where all of a sudden you get into a situation where he's a bit too public. He's a bit too outspoken. Things are getting a bit too complicated, honestly, and maybe toxic and chaotic as well when it comes to Aaron Rodgers with off-the-field issues whether it's with the Pat McAfee show or whatever else, or the fact that he maybe doesn't jive well with the players. He's an older guy. Everyone else is in his 20s. He's in his 40s, right? He's almost double the age of a lot of the guys in the locker room. So then we have that, the fit aspect of it, whether or not Aaron Rodgers will fit with the team, whether or not he will fit with the city, entirely depends on whether or not he's winning. And I think there's a very strong polar opposite effect there, where if the team's winning, we'll love him. And if the team's losing, then we'll hate the fact that the Colts are bringing in yet another aging quarterback. It would be a risky move. I would almost argue that it would be too risky, because right away, my first concern is, what about the future? Because Aaron Rodgers is on his way out. He's not retiring this year, apparently, but he's retiring soon, regardless. If the Colts make a move for Aaron Rodgers, it would indicate that we'd be trying to win a Super Bowl in the next 1 to 2 years, which is great. I just don't know if the Colts quite have a roster capable of making that happen. The thought is that Aaron Rodgers could come in and guide Anthony Richardson, right? Teach him a little bit. Certainly could teach him a lot through all of his years in the NFL, including a Super Bowl championship. But I don't really think he'd want to. And that's the biggest thing with Aaron Rodgers, where I don't think that he would really want to teach Anthony Richardson. I don't think he would want to be the mentor. I think he wants to go out and be the star, which is great if he can find himself on a team where he can go out and be the star. I just don't know if that is necessarily the Colts, because that's just another aging quarterback that is in the ear of Anthony Richardson, giving him tips, whatever that is. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be that guy. He doesn't want to be the mentor, in my opinion. He wants to lead another team to the Super Bowl and be the man. And regardless, he doesn't play the game the same way Anthony Richardson does, right? And regardless, Anthony Richardson has struggles, and we talked about that. Throwing the football and being a passer of the football, he could learn from the best to ever do that, for sure. But their play styles are different. The way they see the game is different. Their ages are different. Everything about them is different. I don't think that necessarily Anthony Richardson and Aaron Rodgers would be a good fit for Anthony Richardson. And in my opinion, the biggest issue that Anthony Richardson has is his lack of experience, because we know he didn't play a lot in college. He just didn't have as many games under his belt, right? For a variety of reasons. He got hurt for the majority of his first season. He got benched in his second season. Now in his third year, Anthony Richardson still doesn't have that much starting experience in big-time games in the SEC or in the NFL, as maybe Jaden Daniels does, for example. Jalen Hurts as well. Great comparison. So Anthony Richardson's lack of experience is the biggest issue. To me, right, those things I just said are all red flags, right? Him getting hurt, him not playing much in college, him getting benched last season. But to me, this is the make or break year. I want Anthony Richardson to start the entire season this year, because I don't think the Colts are ready to win a Super Bowl. I think they could be close, and they kind of need to be close, because Jonathan Taylor's getting older and more expensive. Michael Pittman Jr. is getting older and more expensive. Plenty more examples. I think that it's time for the Colts to ramp themselves up to a Super Bowl, not ring chase for this season, which is what an Aaron Rodgers level move would do. Anthony Richardson, let's have him play the entire season this year. And they've said that we're going to bring in competition. I don't know who that competition is going to be. Maybe it's Aaron Rodgers, but we can't pay him too much, and we can't let him be too much of a complicating factor in the locker room and in the community, right? In the media, in the locker room, whatever it is, we can't let Aaron Rodgers complicate things too much, and we can't pay him too much. We can't overpay him, especially, because that would set us back even further. It set us back in Anthony Richardson's development. It set us back in our Super Bowl chase, especially knowing that we're going to run out of time for Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. to win a Super Bowl, and eventually they're going to retire or move on to somewhere else, and we'll have to blow it up, and the Colts will tank. And that's not where we want to see the Colts be, again, at another period of time in their history. So Aaron Rodgers, if he comes in, I don't think that that's necessarily the goal. I want Anthony Richardson to start the whole season, because I want to truly see. I want to have as many games as possible to find out, is he the guy? If he stays healthy all year and performs well and the Colts improve, maybe we can build a team around him. If he's bad and the team is bad and we have another losing season and we miss the playoffs again, maybe it's time to move on. I understand the fact that this is a big offseason for quarterbacks. I understand the fact that maybe now is the time to grab someone like Aaron Rodgers or Justin Fields, or bring in that competition and a guy that could start. And this draft also is a big opportunity for young quarterbacks. Maybe we have to wait another year. And if that means that we miss out on some quarterback opportunities, I think that's worth the risk, because I think Anthony Richardson is worth the risk, because if Anthony Richardson pans out, we are so much closer to being a Super Bowl team with this roster, rather than having to restart with a new quarterback again. So I don't know who the Colts are going to bring in as competition for for Anthony Richardson's starting quarterback job. To me, it shouldn't be Aaron Rodgers. Maybe I'm wrong. It certainly would be entertaining. It'd be exciting. I'd smile. I'd definitely get excited. I'd have a lot to say if Aaron Rodgers came around. I'd have a lot to say about the season as we got closer to it as well. If Aaron Rodgers came on board, I don't think that's the right decision for right now, considering the context of the team, the context of the league, the context of the players involved. I want to stick with Anthony Richardson, but if Aaron Rodgers came by, there'd certainly be pros and cons to that decision. Okay, we're done with Indiana. I want to talk about college football because it is getting crazy once again. They are going to expand the college football playoff most likely in 2026. So let's be very clear. 2025 is going to stay intact. It's going to be the 12-team playoff. There's going to be the same auto bid structure, buys for conference champions, all of those things. The college football playoff is staying intact for 2025 most likely. 2026 will more than likely see expansion to 14 or 16 teams. Ross Dellinger has reported that that is imminent. Likely what this would include. Now, really sit down, really get yourself composed and get your senses gathered for this one. Likely there's going to be 4 auto bids for the Big Ten and 4 auto bids for the SEC. That means that in the conference standings, probably it'll work that way. Maybe it'll work in terms of playoff rankings, but I imagine that it would mean in the conference standings, top 4 in the Big Ten go, top 4 in the SEC go, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, the highest ranked G5 team, and Notre Dame, if they fit certain ranking requirements, would also go. That equals 14 teams. There's a potential that we could see 2 at-large teams get in as well at the 15 and 16. So this means a lot. First of all, I just dropped a lot of information on you. You can look on really anywhere that reports on college football and probably see that what I'm saying is true. But the SEC and Big Ten would effectively control the college football playoff because they would expand it to 14 and 16. They would have 4 auto bids from the Big Ten, 4 from the SEC, and then, of course, some auto bids from there. So that right away makes conference races more important, which is, if we're talking about, forget the 14 playoff, forget the BCS, forget the period of time before we even had a national championship game. If we're talking about the difference between the 12-team playoff that we currently have and the 14 or 16-team playoff that we could be expanding to, I think this is better because the regular season deserves importance in college football. And making these conference races as tight and interesting as possible would be very, very fun. I'll talk about what would have happened if we did this last season in a second. Also, we could see a world where conference championship weekend shifts from the top 2 teams to maybe teams 3 and 6 or 4 and 5, where we have play-in games, main event play-in games where the teams right on the bubble of qualifying for the playoff would play each other for a spot in the playoff. I would love to see those games at campus sites if they happen. That is way too hypothetical and way down the line, and don't want to spend too much time on that idea. But this would be fun because it simplifies the regular season, right? Part of the reason why we love the NFL is because the playoff scenarios in November and December are so much fun to watch play out. And you understand that if this team wins and this team loses, then this happens and it affects this team in the other conference because this tiebreaker, it's fun, it's interesting. That's then how it would work in college football, whereas right now you see the rankings and really nothing matters because if a team wins or loses, who knows how the committee would rank them, right? And we still have to sit around and wait for the committee to rank the teams, and it's very unclear what the criteria would be. There's so many more moving parts. It simplifies the regular season. It just says, you know what, if you're in the Big Ten, you have to finish in the top 4, and if you do, you go to the playoff. If you are in the SEC and you finish in the top 4, congratulations, you're going to the playoff. If you're a ACC or a Big 12 championship caliber team to play in that game, you go to the playoff right away. And potentially we have room for a couple more at-large teams to sort of collect the best of the rest, perhaps, in that situation. It would make conference races more important. That makes things simple. It emphasizes the regular season again, while probably not sacrificing the quality of the playoff most likely. And it allows for more regular season schedules because if you put us in a situation where the conference standings are all that matter, then your non-conference games kind of don't mean much. Yeah, they mean much to your ranking. They mean much to where you would be in the playoff in terms of seeding. But it doesn't necessarily mean very much in terms of actually qualifying for the playoff, which means that if you're Ohio State, why not schedule Bama? If you're Michigan, why not schedule, I was going to say Oregon, but they're in the Big Ten now. If you're Michigan, why not schedule Georgia, right? Why not? Because it's a non-conference game. Doesn't really matter. You're going to the playoff anyway if you finish in the top 4, and that win or loss isn't going to impact that in any way. And the SEC would probably expand to 9 conference games. We'd have more teams with more conference games because it doesn't matter if you lose in conference. It doesn't matter if you lose. It just matters if you lose in conference. And if that's even, then it's even, right? If you have 9 SEC games, that's 8 more losses, I guess it would be. But it doesn't matter. 8 more teams that would lose one extra game in the SEC rather than scheduling a cupcake win against North Dakota State, bad example, rather than Alcorn State maybe, a free win. You play another SEC team, you have an opportunity to lose, and you have better non-conference games, Big Ten versus SEC, ACC versus Big Ten, or whatever it may be. We could see some of that. Better regular season schedules. More teams in the playoff may or may not be a good thing, but what is nice is that conference races are what's most important. That's going to strengthen rivalries as well. Maybe Ohio State versus Michigan becomes a big deal because the winner of that game could, or the loser of that game could drop out of the top 4, similar to how we talked about that when there was only 4 teams in the playoff at all. I want to talk about what happened if we did this last season. So again, this could happen in 2026. It feels like we'll definitely expand to 14 or 16. It also seems like we'll probably see auto bids for conferences. So the Big Ten, every year, 4 teams go. SEC, every year, 4 teams make it. ACC has 2. Big 12 has 2. G5 team, Notre Dame if they're ranked high enough, and then maybe 2 more at-large teams as well. If we did this last season, the Big Ten standings were the following. It was Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. So those 4 teams would go. Texas would be there alongside Georgia, Tennessee, and Missouri. What's fun about the SEC is Missouri would be at the top of a large tie at 5-3 between Missouri, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Texas A&M, all tied at 5-3 in conference. Insane tiebreakers in the SEC. The top of the SEC would be an absolute dogfight and really a boat race where you're not just racing for 12 playoff spots, but you're racing for 4 conference playoff spots effectively. That's what we could see in the SEC. Moving forward, the Big Ten would have been fun as well. Illinois would have been the next team out. There was a more clear-cut top 4. SMU and Clemson would make the ACC, make it with the ACC. The Big 12 would send Arizona State and Iowa State. BYU would have been right there. And then Boise State would be the top G5 team. Notre Dame would have qualified, of course. And then if we had 2 at-large teams, it would have been Alabama and Miami according to the playoff rankings. That puts 16 teams in there. That puts pretty much every team you can argue deserves to be there. Ole Miss can't complain because there's 4 auto bids in the SEC. If you are capable of winning a national championship, you should be capable of being in the top 4 of the SEC. The teams that could complain about missing the playoff, Alabama and Miami, would have made it in, right? You kind of get everything you want in that situation. You get, whether it's 14 or 16, if it's 14, we could see the 2 teams with a bye, just like the NFL, be the Big Ten champion and the SEC champion automatically. I could see that because they control a lot of the gravity of what could happen because they have the most power as the biggest and most influential conferences. In my opinion, if we're going to do this, we should fully commit to it and completely have auto bids. If we're going to start introducing auto bids, I think we should just straight up have auto bids and no at-large. Because the at-large is what makes it complicated and it makes it subjective. Let's have a system every year where maybe we do it this way, where there's 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC teams, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, 1 group of 5 team, Notre Dame, right? Or maybe we just have a column for independents. And then there's 2 more spots. In my opinion, is that the amount of auto bids should change year to year. So what I mean by that is whichever 2 conferences finished the best in the playoff in the previous year, add an auto bid. So those last 2 auto bids are filled by whoever made the championship from the last season. That doesn't mean the team carries over. It means the conference carries over. So who won the national championship? Ohio State, which means the Big Ten would get a 5th at-large spot or a 5th auto bid, right? So they would get that 5th team in the playoff, which would allow room for someone next season. Maybe it's Michigan, right? Or if the last season were to replicate, maybe it would be Illinois. And then the second one would be the next best conference. So this is where things get tricky because I think you would skip Notre Dame in this scenario because Notre Dame, of course, isn't in a conference, and adding another spot for an independent is kind of silly because there really isn't any other good independents. There's no reason to have 2 independent spots. But then the next, I suppose, who would it be? Who was in the semifinals? Penn State was in the semifinals, and Ohio State beat Texas. So the next one would be the SEC. So then there would be a 5th SEC team. So that's probably how it would go year after year, is you'd end up with 5 Big Ten and 5 SEC, although I'm sure those 2 most powerful conferences wouldn't be complaining about that. I think that's an idea for how we could fill out a 16-team bracket if we were to go all the way there. I'm apprehensive about having buys in college football or any playoff system at all. I don't like buys. I really think they've hurt things. I think they're hurting the NFL, for example. But regardless, we're in a situation where the college football playoffs expanding once again. We're going to have auto bids. That's crazy. I think it could be fun. I think it could be better because I think it solidifies the importance of the regular season. It solidifies the importance rather of conference season in the regular season as well. And then it puts us in a situation where, again, if you're a team like IU, then you fully understand what you have to do to make the playoff. Right now, next year, it's kind of unclear. Could Purdue make it in at 10-2? I have no idea. But if there was a top 4 teams straight up, probably they could get in at 10-2. I say that because it's likely that Indiana will be favored at every game except for at Penn State and at Oregon. Do they have to win one of those games to make the playoff? Probably, honestly, next season. But it's nice if it's concrete, if it's simple. It makes the conference rivalries a bit more fierce, a bit more intense, a bit more important. They'd have a bit more emphasis, perhaps. I kind of like this idea. I'm going to be honest with you. It might be better than the system we have now. It also dilutes the impact of having a first-round bye and not quite knowing where those games would have to be. If we had 16, then every single team would have a home playoff. Every single top seed would have a home playoff game, which I think is fantastic. Oregon deserved one, right? Being the number 1 team in the country means that you should play a game at home, in my opinion. I don't think it's right that a team could be one of the best teams in the country, skip the first round. If you're good enough to skip the first round, then you shouldn't have to lose out on your home playoff game, right? And I understand the fact that they skip the first round and play in the bowl. I understand the concept that there's 6 New Year's 6 bowls and 2 go to the semifinals, 4 go to the quarterfinals. But if you have 16 teams, then everyone can have a home playoff game that deserves one, and you have more teams with home playoff games, which is fun. And then you transition into a situation where you can play that out the rest of the bowls, and the playoffs have a more even playing field, I suppose, because teams don't have byes and awkward differences in rest and rest versus rust. That whole debate. This could be fun. The Big Ten and SEC would control it, and they'd probably then dominate college football for real for the rest of time. But the ACC would get teams in, and the Big 12 would get teams in. They're guaranteed to, so they've got to keep some recruits in state, right? And then you could be in situations where G5 teams and Notre Dame have an opportunity as well, a couple at-large groups. This might not be a bad idea. This idea of having 16 teams, maybe 14, I think if you're going to expand, you should just go straight to 16 and keep it there for a long time and keep the system for a long time. I think it could work. Obviously, there's some risks, there's some flaws, but it would keep everyone happy, and I think it would keep the fans happy too. It would make this playoff really interesting. It would make the regular season interesting again as well. I don't hate this for college football. I don't hate this for the Big Ten or the SEC or anyone really. This could be a win-win for everybody, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity of seeing that play out in the future. Again, this would be 2026 if it happens. We'll continue to update, but 2025 will stay the same, and after that, the doors are going to break wide open, and we're going to be in a big-time opportunity with a lot to talk about the college football playoff if this happens, and it certainly make IU football and even Purdue football a whole lot more interesting when it comes to the Big Ten conference race. College football playoff is going to continue to expand, and honestly, I'm a little bit excited about it. Okay, let's talk about the NBA. I want to talk about the true title contenders. So we've just had the All-Star break. Obviously, everyone was off. The NBA returns tonight. Most teams will play tomorrow. I want to talk about who I think could truly win an NBA championship this season. I have 4 teams in the East and 4 teams in the West, and then a couple teams that I think could emerge as title contenders later on in the year. Really just one, honestly, in mind. I should just make it a 5th team in the West, but real quick, we'll rapid fire through these as we wrap up the show here. In the East, Cleveland, obviously, top seed. Their roster is built incredibly well. They have 2 forwards and 2 guards, really. They have 2 big men on the floor at a time, and they have 2 elite guards. They play very well with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley on the floor at the same time. They also play well with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland in the backcourt at the same time. And then you have a 5th guy that you can kind of plug and play. I really liked it when, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Jordas Niang got traded away. I liked it when he was there. But still, whoever that 5th guy on the floor is, they can rotate through that 5th guy, and you understand that the backcourt's going to be solid no matter what. You understand that the front court's going to be solid no matter what. And then you understand that you have a 5th guy to kind of add some flavor out of timeouts and add some flavor throughout the game. Rotate a little bit, play the hot hands for that 5th player on the court when you understand that Donovan Mitchell is going to be great, Darius Garland's going to be great, and the front court is going to be strong in its own right. Cleveland's roster is built incredibly well. They don't go on losing streaks. They don't really lose games, right? They're the top seed for a reason. They are beatable, but they're far and away the number 1 team in the East and clearly a title contender. This might be their year, and if it's not, They still have next season, and they have the season after that. The Cleveland Cavaliers will be good for a while. I'm excited to see what they're able to do in the playoffs this year, because this is a team that doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. Donovan Mitchell does, but nobody else really does on this team. That'll be interesting to watch, especially when the number 2 team in the East and my number 2 title contender is Boston, who won the championship last year, right? They have a ton of playoff experience. This core has been to the finals multiple times. They won the championship last season. Plenty of playoff experience. The Celtics are kind of quietly the 2 seed in the East. I don't think people are really fully aware of what the Celtics could be capable of, but they could be capable of a lot. Again, plenty of playoff experience. This is the team that won the championship last year. Absolutely cannot overlook them. The Celtics will be great. They're my number 2 contender in the East. Number 3 is the 3 seed in the New York Knicks. They really set themselves up for this in the offseason when they acquired Karl Anthony Towns. Him coming to New York really indicated to the world that the Knicks were ready to win now, and the Knicks were potentially ready to go win a championship. They have star power. They have a fantastic environment in Madison Square Garden. I've been there. They have a supporting cast that I love as well. The Knicks are really great. They have an opportunity to be fantastic and potentially go on a run and win the championship, because the Celtics aren't the best team in the East anymore. The Cavaliers are, and they're a little bit vulnerable because they don't quite have the playoff experience that you may need to go on a run and win the championship. The Knicks set themselves up for success with the Cat acquisition, and they're setting themselves up for success in the regular season. If they round into form, they could win a championship. Indiana is the 4th one. We really don't know what Indiana is capable of. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year with effectively this exact same roster, but Bennedict Mathurin was out for the playoffs. Tyrese Halliburton was injured for some periods of time as well. We don't know what Indiana's capable of. They made the Eastern Conference Finals kind of injured and as underdogs, and now this is the same team coming back. They last year ended as the 6th seed. This year they're hovering around the 4. They're probably going to be the 4. Again, Mathurin would be here. Halliburton would be here. We don't know what they're capable of. If Indiana stays hot, and if they stay healthy and they get hot towards the end of the year, Indiana could do anything, and that's what we saw last year as they knocked out the Bucks and they knocked out the Knicks as the lower seed, and then nearly took Game 1 and took control of the series against the Celtics as well. Again, injured, and then played the rest of that series for the most part without Hallie. Indiana, we don't know what they're capable of. They could be capable of a lot. They could have a very high ceiling. We just don't quite know the answer to that question yet. I'm excited to see Indiana, and I'm excited to see them be contenders in the East. In the West, far and away the top seed, 8 games above number 2, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Shea is impossible to defend. They're returning to full strength. We're kind of starting to see what the real Thunder is with Chet Holmgren. This Thunder team, again, not a lot of playoff experience. Not any, if I'm not mistaken, for the most part, for the majority of their stars. That's a concern, but this is the best roster in the West, most likely, and they have a very high chance of going far and winning it all. They're a title contender, undoubtedly. Memphis has a killer big 3. They're the best offense in the game. We talked about them earlier. Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, Desmond Bane, and, of course, the highest scoring offense in the league. They have an opportunity to be great. Denver's done it before. They can do it again, right, with Murray and Jokic. Wouldn't be surprised if Denver pulled out a victory. And then the Lakers potentially have an opportunity to win a championship in year 1 with Luka Doncic. That's a long shot, but it's possible, right? I don't know if year 1 is quite the answer, but they'll round into form. They got some big games coming up this season. It's a long shot, but the Lakers could do it. And then the other team that I wanted to mention was the Timberwolves, because we saw Anthony Edwards in the playoffs last year. They gave away Karl Anthony Towns. That was strange. They didn't win a title last year, and now it feels like they deserve it, because they really could have last season. Then they gave up Karl Anthony Towns. Their fans deserve a championship. They were disappointed by the Vikings. They are probably going to be disappointed by the Twins. Minnesota deserves a championship, and I'd love to see Anthony Edwards get them there. Right now, I think they're the 7th seed. But if they're the 7th seed, they'd be playing the Grizzlies, right? And obviously have the play-in tournament to deal with. But if the Timberwolves played the Grizzlies, that's anybody's game. And if they played the Rockets, I left the Rockets off this list. I don't think they're capable of winning a championship this year. If they play the Rockets, absolutely could be an upset, and they could be that 7-seed team like the Lakers in the past to go on a run and maybe end up winning a championship. The Timberwolves are an honorable mention in the West. I don't think there's a team like that in the East. I think it's a pretty clear. I probably could have put the Bucks on this list as well. It's a pretty clear 5 probably in the East in terms of teams that could actually win it all. And I think that the West is a little bit muddier because there was a lot more trades in the West, a lot more moving around. Who knows what the ceiling of the Warriors is, or the Timberwolves, or the Mavericks, or any of these teams, really. The Lakers. We don't really know what these teams' ceilings are and whether or not they're capable of winning a championship as a result. So I'm excited to see that play out, that's the short list of teams I think actually could win are Cleveland, Boston, and New York. And then on the other side, it's OKC, Memphis, and Denver. The Lakers and the Pacers are kind of working their way into the mix. The Bucks are probably in there. The Timberwolves are in there as well. It's hard to keep this list short. It feels like a third of the league can win a title every single time we get around to the playoffs, and that's part of why the playoffs are so much fun. Shorter list is 6, and it's just the top 3 in each conference. And then once we actually get to the playoffs, we'll have a much more serious conversation about how they're going to play out and who could potentially win it all. But that's my short list. You have a list of 10, Cleveland, Boston, New York, Indiana, OKC, Memphis, Denver, Los Angeles Lakers, plus Milwaukee and Minnesota. And then the list of 6 is just the top 3 teams. You look at the standings right now in each conference, the East and the West, Cleveland, Boston, New York, OKC, Memphis, and Denver. And I guess you can have a list of 8 in between. It's difficult to pin down a clear short list, but the list of teams I think could win is 10, which is a lot, and it's very high, and I understand that, but that's what makes the playoffs fun, and I'm excited to get to that point in the year. We're almost there because I feel like this is about to be another level of an entertaining NBA playoffs on the way, with, in my opinion, 10 total teams that can win it all. All right, that's pretty much all I've got to talk about today. Longer show today. We're at an hour and 15 minutes already. Other games I watched since we last spoke, Duke went to Virginia. Cooper Flagg played great. He had 17 and 14. Duke, fantastic rebounding team. They shot well. Caden Proctor, Con Knipple. They really have a roster that's built well, similar to the Cavaliers. Cooper Flagg's there to do everything, right? And then you have some strong rebounders in the front court, and then some shooters with Caden Proctor and Con Knipple. So I like Duke a lot. I like the way they're built. I don't know if they're built to last in the tournament, but they're certainly built to get very far. I don't know if they're built to win games in the Final Four in that stretch of the season, but they're certainly built to last in the tournament. And I'm very interested to see how that plays out. Big win at Virginia. That was a thrill. That was fun to watch. I'm excited to see Duke the rest of the year. Sweden beat USA 2-1. No one really cares. This game was overshadowed by the fact that Canada won earlier in the day, securing themselves a spot in the championship. So in the Four Nations final, it's going to be USA versus Canada again on Thursday, this time in Boston, in America. Last time it was, of course, in Montreal. That's going to be absolutely fantastic on Thursday. That'll happen before we actually talk again. So that's in the looking ahead section. Wednesday, today, there's no games for teams in the state of Indiana, but the Hornets go to the Lakers to bring the NBA back. Number 4, Alabama, goes to number 15, Missouri. There's Champions League knockout stage games all day. Real Madrid goes to Man City. That's my favorite one. Austin Villa goes to Liverpool. We'll see the best team in the Premier League play today. And women's basketball, number 22, Michigan State goes to number 4, USC. Those are the games I have my eyes on tonight. Tomorrow, and meaning Thursday, we have Pacers-Grizzlies. Huge game. We, of course, talked about the significance of that one. Canada goes to USA for the Four Nations final. The Celtics go to the 76ers. The Suns go to the Spurs. And then in women's basketball, we get to see UCLA take on Illinois in a top 25 matchup. Next show is going to be Friday. Stay tuned for that. Should come out about 1 p.m. It's 12:30 right now, so I'm not sure if that's going to end up panning out. Maybe the show will come out at 2. Might be the same thing on Friday. Talk about the Pacers game against the Grizzlies. We'll talk about the Pacers and their big weekend against the Clippers and the Nuggets. We'll talk about IU and Purdue taking on one another on Sunday. Plenty more as well. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. If you are still listening, and especially if you're still watching, I very much appreciate you. We're looking to grow this show. An hour and 20 minutes is how long this show is going to end up being. So again, very much appreciate your presence here today. Looking forward to speaking with you guys again this Friday, and the next week it should be Tuesday and Thursday. It is a fantastic week to be a fan of sports, fantastic week to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. I appreciate you all very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again this Friday.